It feels like for the first time in a while, we actually have some like active, interesting weather to talk about, a little bit of volatility in the forecast. Obviously in the long range, Eric covered this yesterday. We're still kind of watching and waiting to see where this pattern might evolve, kind of stuck in this ridge in the middle part of the country, trough off the west coast of the U.S. That seems to be the case in the long term, like 10 to 14 day range, but we'll look at some hints of progression and change, I think, in early January that are starting to pop up at the end of this video. But to start, we have to talk about the pair of lows that are moving through the U.S. here this morning. It's going to be a busy day, I think, on this Thursday for many folks across the continental U.S. You can see the reason right there in the middle, kind of the top of the screen. The strong low pressure system that's developing kind of right over South and North Dakota here. That's pushing to the east. You can see a cold front with convection forming along that all the way through Texas up into Wisconsin here. This morning we have a serious wind event that's occurring on the back side of the system. I think the pressure gradient between the low here and the high here is very strong, and the air is just screaming through here. In fact, if I jump over and just show you those surface winds here this morning, see them wrapping up behind that centered low, and maybe just kind of east of Fargo here this morning. And the winds are just careening through here. You can see them kind of going around this little bit here. That's the Black Hills of South Dakota, the elevation there. The wind's kind of wrapping around that. The cold front that I mentioned earlier, stretching down through Texas, that pops up nicely here. And then that next low that we have to talk about coming onshore here in the northwest over the next 48 hours as well. Really the big story here are these winds here today. A lot of advisories out for those with high wind warnings, wind advisories. And these winds are going to be pushing east through the Midwest and then into New England over the kind of the next 48 to 72 hours here. Started with that infrared satellite picture. We can also see down here in the southeast, kind of a secondary low bringing moisture up into this area here. That's an area that needs it. We'll talk about that in just a few slides here, but kind of a lack of rainfall across the southern Mississippi Valley and the southeast has been expected here as we kind of travel through winter. So getting some rainfall in here I think is relevant. And then if we look at the radar mosaic here this morning, you can see the rainfall over Mississippi, Alabama, pushing into Georgia, Florida here. You can see rainfall now pushing into Iowa, Missouri. We're warming up the Midwest. We're warming up atop that snowpack. The melt was on yesterday, kind of started as we brought in some moisture air. And then with the rain falling atop of that, the much warmer temperatures here this morning. I think we're going to be melting a lot of the Midwest snowpack that we've built in over the last 2 weeks. For the north over North Dakota with the cooler air here, seeing almost blizzard-like conditions. We have blizzard warnings out for counties here in the northern plains. And that next low coming on shore in the northwest. We'll talk about California a little bit later in this video, but you can see the pair of kind of systems here that have caught our eye here this morning. This low here is going to be tracking almost kind of west to east, bringing the winds on the back side of it through the east into the Midwest and bringing the rainfall across this area here with some snow on the back side up in Canada. I want to jump over. This was a tweet from the National Weather Service just showing the maximum wind gust over the last 24 hours. Now, they did post this yesterday evening, so the winds have kind of shifted east a bit since then. But when you get up into the red color here, you're talking like 70 miles an hour here. And yeah, I believe that's mph. So I think like 65 to 70 is when you're really getting into that like damaging threshold. 55, 60, you're definitely blowing some things around. Some like weak outbuildings might be at risk. But you get up over 70 and you're talking about power outages, larger trees down, structural damage, and we've climbed above that in a lot of these locations. You can see the Golden Triangle, Montana, up near like 80. There's a wind gust up near 100 miles an hour near northwest South Dakota. You get into that like dark brown color, you're approaching 100 miles an hour. We saw fires, I believe, in southeast or at least eastern Colorado yesterday. We could see some of those on radar. So this has been not only a windy December, but a windy, last 48 hours here across the northern plains, including a lot of areas here across the northwest, not up to like, 80 to 100 miles an hour, but you're still talking significant wind gusts over 55 miles an hour over a really wide area of geography here. A number of states that have been dealing with this wind, and it's going to be pushing to the east today. And I'll mention, I don't think we're done with the wind. I think with the jet stream screaming through like this, Eric kind of mentioned yesterday, that's kind of that whip moving through the Canadian border. This area is going to be prone to more of these wind events, at least as this pattern sticks around. We do jump over and look at all those warnings, watches, and advisories here this morning from the National Weather Service. Let's see if I can update this about 6 a.m. about the recording of this video. And in that kind of dark, mustard beige color here, those are the high wind warnings across much of the central and northern plains. Blizzard warnings atop those high wind warnings here across much of North Dakota, northwest Minnesota, northeastern Montana here with that snow coming around on the backside. With those high winds, I believe blizzard warning is sustained at 30 or 35 miles an hour. And then wind advisories beyond that. And those stretch almost east all the way over to New England here. As this system moves west to east, we're going to watch those 50 to 60 mile an hour wind gusts just travel along with it. Now, I don't think we're going to be seeing the kind of 80 to 100 mile an hour wind gusts that we did see further west as this pushes east, but still significant. It's going to be kind of loud outside, with a lot of wind over the next 24 to 48 hours. See some fog advisories here across the Gulf Coast. We continue to see flood watches, unfortunately, for the Pacific Northwest with additional rainfall coming down there. They've had so much here over the last kind of 7 to 14 days, and I just showed you that low pressure system bringing more rainfall in here today. Winter weather advisories posted for Wisconsin, portions of Minnesota. As this low tracks west to east, we're going to see some snow come around on the back side of this. There's going to be kind of a transition line here that's preventing more kind of a wider spread snow event, frankly. And this low is not a huge snow maker kind of south of this line, kind of about here. We'll look at that in just a second. I do want to jump over. You're probably thinking, Matt, you're looking at all these high winds. You're looking at a low pressure system here and here. I mean, the jet stream must just be cranking through this area. And that would be the correct presumption if we do jump up and look at those 250 millibar level winds way up, kind of where the planes are at cruising altitude. The jet stream is cranking. In fact, we look at this kind of whole half of the globe here, the strongest jet streak, if you will, right here over the northwest, Washington into Montana, kind of right along where we saw all those strong surface winds. Low pressure system lining up with the trough nicely here, centered right over the northern plains. That's helping to kick that low west to east across the continental U.S. Ridge setting up over California here, but also if we look further west, we can see that Pacific block, the ridge here over Alaska, kind of the Aleutians. Let's call that, high, that ridge there, and then this low north of Hawaii. This is kind of your classic Pacific block scenario. We have a high over the Aleutians and a low north of Hawaii, and this tends to block up the pattern, and we hold on to this configuration for anywhere from like 1 to 2 to 3 weeks at times, depending. And that seems to be the case here, where we've had it for the last 4 to 6 days. It's going to help to influence this troughing that's going to move into California next week, and it's going to influence ridging downstream of it over much of the continental U.S., at least through New Year's. Kind of Eric touched on that yesterday. We also have a kind of brief subtropical component here as this trough dives down in here, and that's helping to produce some of that rainfall that we're seeing over the southeast. Haven't seen a lot of that this year, but it is helping bring some moisture into that area. Do want to jump over and kind of show the number one story, I think, with this event, and that is the winds. These are resolved overnight. I'm going to refresh this. Yeah, we got the new model run in. Western South Dakota, both the Black Hills, even like into the, quote-unquote lowlands area in the northwest South Dakota, we've seen some extreme wind gusts. The NAM here analyzing like 60s, but I saw one report up over 80 or 90 miles an hour in northwest, like Buffalo, South Dakota. We'll have to see if that's accurate, but I think the winds are even stronger than being analyzed here from the 3-kilometer NAM. That's worth noting. As I play this forecast forward, let's take it out to lunchtime. See those winds traveling down the plains. There's the western half, the Platte River into northwest Kansas, and with that low swinging out into the Midwest, out ahead of the low, kind of along and ahead of that cold front. We're seeing a different wind event here across the Midwest, so Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, portions of Ohio up over 50 miles an hour through today, with rainfall coming down, warm air being blown up quickly. This is your scenario for very rapid snowmelt across this corridor here that's had so much of that early season snow. You can also see that low coming on shore in Oregon. High wind gusts along the coast, a little bit lower in the 50s, and like Willamette Valley, a little bit lower in the metro areas, but then higher in the plateau east of the Cascades. I'm going to play this through this evening, and those wind gusts shifting east across New York, Pennsylvania, into Ontario, number of growing regions here, and then further east across New England as we go into Friday morning. Secondary low develops along the coast, and those high winds all the way up the New Jersey coastline into Long Island, across New England coasts. I mean, even to lunchtime Friday, impressive coastal wind gusts up near 70 to 80 miles an hour for New England. So kind of this bimodal distribution of the strongest wind gusts and these corridors here with a little bit, comparatively less in between that. If I play this forecast a little bit forward, see this next system kind of comes up and over. You'll see a few more wind gusts kind of populate here, but nothing to the magnitude of this initial system that's coming through at the end of this week here. If I play this forward, this is just the same forecast. 3-kilometer NAM tracking where that low in precipitation is going to form. I want to see where that rain snow line is. Making this valid. Let's update this with the latest model. Make it valid about 6-7 a.m. See the blizzard-like conditions on the back side of this. We saw those winter weather advisories populated into this area here. As that low tracks east, the wind gusts will be picking up at ahead of it in Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. Snow turning over here in western Wisconsin, Eau Claire, over to the Twin Cities. Transitioning over here, I'm skeptical of this. I think this will mostly be coming down as mixed, like sleet, mostly rain here in northern Illinois. Just go through this evening. And then the secondary low back here over the northwest, bringing additional snowfall for some of the elevations here in Idaho and Montana. Additional rainfall coming for like Portland, the Willamette Valley, a little bit south of kind of the areas that saw the heaviest rain over the last 7 days, thankfully, but this is still going to add to it. And then broader rain spreading across the eastern U.S. here. That low continues to track through overnight Thursday. Snow transitioning on the backside over Michigan, Wisconsin, but not expecting significant accumulations. You can see it's a little bit lighter at this point. Maybe some snow showers overnight in like Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, but again, maybe just a dusting from those as the air comes back below freezing. Heavy rain across Pennsylvania, New York, New England with those strong wind gusts. With this now kind of next coastal low developing, bringing those strong wind gusts by Friday at lunchtime. And that swings through, and we don't see a big change over to snow on the backside of it. More just kind of like we saw in the Midwest, those backside snow showers maybe bringing a dusting to some of the areas in New England here. As I reach the end of this forecast here, you'll notice that rain sinking down further into northern California here, less focused on Washington. And that kind of takes us to the end of the 60-hour forecast from the 3-kilometer NAM. If you ever want like a good gauge as to what to watch for meteorologically, just kind of like notable, you could say like news making significant impacts to like travel or property, you can always jump over and type in like WPC hazards. The first link is going to pop up, the U.S. Day 3 to 7 hazards outlook. And this is kind of just beyond, I think, like the all hazards map. So obviously over the next 48 hours, we got to account for all these different hazards. The snow over Wisconsin, snow over Minnesota, high winds here over the central plains. We have red flag warnings. I kind of glossed over the fire threat here, but we obviously saw those fires in southeastern or eastern Colorado yesterday, and we need to watch that in Kansas here today as well. Flood watches out for the Pacific Northwest. We kind of saw that all in the next 48 hours of the forecast. When you're looking kind of just beyond that into like the end of the week or that kind of next period, and you look at those all hazards, you can pull up this map here. I actually don't like this like interactive one that they put out where you can kind of see the legends here. I just click on static hazards map. I think it's a little bit easier to look at. And this is going to tell you from December 20th through the 24th, so kind of our next stretch of 4 or 5 days here before Christmas, what we need to watch for. And no surprise here, high winds back for the Front Range and the High Plains. Heavy precip now moving into Northern California. Heavy snow for the Northern Cascades near Boise and Yosemite, and then frost freeze they'll have to watch this weekend over the southeast, kind of getting into the peanut and citrus area there in southern Alabama and Georgia there. So that kind of tells us, one, these are the areas to watch, but then probably no major, I'm going to say major because we'll still have some weather moving through here, but no major weather events moving through the central eastern part of the country. No major severe storms, no major blizzards kind of in this corridor here. I'm going to watch this area for some heavy snow, but later in the forecast period, like beyond Christmas, that's not captured in this time range here. So this kind of tells us we're moving into a quieter pattern here very quickly. If I do pull up the 3-kilometer NAM snowfall forecast, this is going to pull us into the weekend here. You'll notice it's struggling on the backside with some of those backside snow showers. I don't think we accumulate up to like 4 inches in Illinois, Indiana, what this is resolving here. And we don't see significant accumulations through like Wisconsin, Minnesota, or Michigan here. I think we're just seeing a dusting on the backside of this, say for some of the higher elevations in like New York and New England here. We do see improved snowfall over the next 48 hours over the Northern Cascades, Idaho, like Yosemite. Some of that was captured in the hazards map we just looked at. But most of that heavy snowfall, significantly, well off into Ontario or Quebec here. Some marginal accumulations up here in northern Minnesota. Now, a big component of this is obviously temperatures. We've been touching on the warm up here that has been part of this pattern change. If I show you the high temperatures just here today, much warmer across the Midwest into the 50s. Strong winds, warmth, humidity, and rain is a recipe for rapid snowmelt. You're kind of checking all the boxes for rapid snowmelt in that regard. So expecting significant snowmelt here. Curious to see if we wake up to any snowfall across some of the corridors here tomorrow morning. On the back side of the low, you can see temperatures coming down here this morning, coincident with that blizzard warning. Tule fog standing out nicely in the Central Valley, but otherwise, much of the continental U.S. warmer here on Thursday. Backside of the low on Friday, bring those temperatures down, but we're already rebounding, like in Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, back above freezing. I think by maybe the daytime high. Much warmer out in the plains, into the 70s. The week before Christmas here, and by Saturday the warmth returning to a wide area of the country. That whip that Eric mentioned is kind of back on across the Canadian border. We do see another low sneak through on Sunday. We'll look at this in the ECMWF forecast in just a minute, but it's brief. by and large, the warmth comes surging back in, to the point where we're even looking at high 70s in Texas by Monday. Cool air spreading into the east in New England. But then the warmth starts coming back to a wide area of the country by Wednesday. Now, we're going over a little bit cooler in the west, but that's because that low that we've been advertising is coming into California, bringing rainfall and snowfall to this year, as we'll look at that in a second. These were the daytime highs. I do want to touch on the overnight lows really quickly, because tonight, that quick whipsaw, bringing temperatures back down in the Midwest, and then actually pushes in. There's December 20th. Remember, we saw in the all hazards map that we were getting back down to potentially a frost or freeze in this area here. Now, you might question, Matt, we've been seeing a lot of this area here going over colder relative to areas just outside of it. It's because we've had a high that keeps developing over the southeast. And when you get underneath a high pressure system overnight, especially in winter, you can bottom out the temperatures relative to other areas here. So that's why we keep seeing this area show up as like a frost and freeze concern. And if we look over the last 14 days of precip anomalies, well, it shows up. Apart from California, this has been the driest area thanks to that high. We've had some of these kind of coastal lows swing through. It's brought rain to the coastal areas. Obviously, we're getting needed rain in here today. But if that high keeps developing over here, you're going to keep bringing cold temperatures and a lack of rainfall, more broadly. And we can see that just looking over the last 14 days or so. To talk about the West, I do want to change the jet stream geography we typically look at. This is looking at the North Pacific jet stream. If I started here this morning, let's do like 10 a.m. Thursday. That's close enough. There's that classic block pattern. Ridge west of Alaska, a little trough underneath a broader trough just north of Hawaii, and that's your classic Rex block kind of configuration. It happens to be producing kind of a downstream ridge right now, but these often produce a trough just downstream of them, and that is the case when we take the forecast out into next week. That high over low sticking around, maybe moving slightly to the west, and now helping to produce that trough over the western U.S. early next week. We really see the jet stream kind of targeting California. By the middle of the week, Wednesday, you'd expect the precipitation to pick up across the state into Oregon around that time period, helping to bring snow levels down a little bit, and we keep that flow perpendicular to the state and the elevation, both the coastal range and the Sierra Nevadas. This is looking like a better recipe for precip and snow. You even get another jet streak over on Christmas. Not necessarily good news if you wanted, a fair weather holiday, but it is good news if you wanted snowfall or if you wanted rainfall to come into the state, or if you wanted to wash out some of that tule fog, which I think we'll do. I'm taking this forecast out to Friday the 26th. If we look back to the Pacific, you might say, it looks the same. High over low. That's that blocked up pattern that we've seen. This hasn't changed much. We are seeing it kind of elongate and amplify a bit by the end of the week, but now seeing ridging downstream, troughing over New England, keeping New England comparatively colder for the Christmas week, but by and large, the middle part of the country staying warmer, colder up into Canada, and by the end of the forecast period, amplifying that block even further, but it's still there. We still have something of a trough and a jet streak downstream of it across the west. So this is the pattern we're waiting to see if it breaks up in January. Now, we kind of put this all together in the ECMWF precip forecast. Here's this initial low coming through today. Heavy rain across much of the eastern U.S., central and eastern, through the southeast. Snow on the backside well north. Some snow showers on the backside, but not significant. We have that second low that snuck through quickly, moving through Manitoba here, largely staying in Ontario and Quebec as we go through this weekend. But the rainfall coming down into California by Sunday to Monday. Let's see kind of the atmospheric river there, largely calm across the east. We saw that in the day 3 to 7 hazards through this time period. Heavy snow in the northern Cascades, that lines up with what we saw from the WPC. And then really by Wednesday, remember Wednesday was when we really saw that jet stream action kick up into California. We see a deep low here around 980 west of San Francisco. This is your recipe for widespread coastal precip, perhaps some wind gusts. Also tracking a weak system moving through the east by middle of the week, maybe bringing some rainfall on Christmas Eve to this area here, but not much. Really the focus is on California, where the Sierra Nevadas definitely get in on the snowfall now Wednesday the 24th, even pushing into parts of Arizona, Utah, the Colorado Rockies. We have another low coming in. I mentioned there was that next jet streak coming behind it on Christmas. More snow from the northern Sierras, central California. And now we have a low tracking through the Great Lakes, on Boxing Day here. And that brings a shot of precipitation through the Midwest and into the east. And at least the European model now calling for an interesting day after Christmas forecast for New York, Boston, Connecticut. And this would be a heavy snowfall event. We were well out into the forecast at this point, kind of like 7 to 10 days. So can't put the Sharpie on this one yet. But we'll pencil it in as something to watch late next week. But we're still seeing rain across the west, even by the end of the week on Friday for California, as that low pushes east and this low starts to degrade and that trough shifts a little bit further to the north, which we saw at the end of the forecast period. Again, splitting hairs here way out into the forecast. If we look at the total snowfall just over the next 10 days, I did this quickly because, one, we can see all the snowfall across California, lesser so over the Oregon Cascades, more so over Washington. Good precipitation and snowfall here over western Montana, Idaho, Yosemite. This would be good for the upper Colorado Basin. Sierra Nevada is finally getting like that decent off-chart 3 to 4 foot snowfall event that they need to climb back closer to average here through the early part of the year. The snow levels aren't great, but they're not terrible. And this should help us move the needle a little bit in that regard. Not seeing as good as snow here over in like the Platte River Basin, source region. We'll have to wait a little bit longer in the winter, I think, to see before that starts to climb up. But by and large, in the east, your significant snowfall more over far northeast New England, if not up into Ontario, Quebec, or the northern Canadian prairie at this point. Not seeing any significant continental U.S. snowfall events like south of that line there. If we just total precip out through the next 10 days, you can see, over an inch in that corridor here, more so over that snowfall corridor, but then really northern California, the maximum amount of rainfall in the continental U.S. over the next 10 days, but rainfall all the way south, getting towards San Diego, an inch in the Los Angeles Valley. Rainfall even here into Arizona, Utah, some of this falling as snow, Nevada, widespread area of 1 to 2 inches plus of rainfall here with obviously higher amounts in the higher elevations here, the Sacramento Valley. Look at San Francisco up near 6 inches, Sacramento near 7 or 8, and this is an impressive rainfall event over 10 days for the state of California. The moisture is coming. Much like Eric did, I want to touch on those temperatures quickly. I'm taking this forward through Friday, Saturday. You can see kind of that whip action that he talked about. Warmer temperatures rebounding. I'm really doing this quickly. I want to get that Wednesday high temp for Christmas Eve. We'll take this out to lunchtime. See much warmer temperatures south of like I-70. 70s and 60s, but still into like 40s and 30s across a wide area here, across the middle part of the country. The coldest air kind of held up along the border, if not north of that. And as we go into Christmas Day, take it out to lunchtime, the warmth spreading all the way up into Nebraska, Illinois, Indiana. You're talking 60s, 50s, 40s across a wide area of the country. New England staying much colder, but even like the Metro East getting up near 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not the coldest Christmas ever for those areas as well. And then again, see, colder on the backside of it, but the coldest, brutally cold air that we've already seen in December multiple times still held up well up into Canada at this point, save for like the Adirondacks in New York. I do want to mention the GFS. That is on the left here as we kind of compare these two models. Now it's kind of hard to see on the smaller screen. I'm going to play this forecast forward, both resolving the low pretty similarly at the end of this week, both bringing that Northern California precipitation by Sunday into San Francisco, Sacramento on Monday. Decent agreement here on that weak system that we saw kind of midweek, Tuesday to Wednesday across the Ohio Valley. And then plenty of rainfall now moving to California by Wednesday, Christmas Eve. Weak system here on Christmas on the ECMWF. Kind of questionable if that'll even come down as rainfall. GFS has this a little bit further east. So some differences in like the Christmas Day rainfall forecast, but definitely warm across that corridor there. And then the ECMWF a little bit stronger initially with this low that we mentioned developing late in the week on Friday. GFS more washed out, and that stronger low brings a stronger snowfall event and a stronger rainfall event for like the Mid-Atlantic, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. You can see the heavier snow now over New York, Connecticut, Providence, whereas the GFS keeps that rain snow line further north across Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont. So that's a pretty big difference between these two models as we go through the end of next week. We'll have to keep an eye on this low and how it develops, but still both in agreement that California is going to see just about a week of precipitation for the different geographies up and down the state, including the Sierra Nevada. So decent agreement between the two models, but some differences in that late week system for the eastern U.S., especially that rain snow line. To kind of sum it up over the 10-day for precipitation anomalies, not a surprise to see this area the wettest, middle part of the country dry. I mentioned that kind of propensity to produce that high pressure system here in this area here, keeping this corridor drier. Wetter for New England and the east with multiple systems both at the end of this week and the end of next week. And then that corridor of heaviest snowfall across the Canadian prairie into the portions of the shield here. If we look out into the long range, I took this ECMWF ensemble forecast well out, trying to see if this Pacific block would break down. You can see I'm well out here near the end of the forecast period. This is all the way on Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. You still see the high over the low pattern west of Hawaii, still see the trough over the western U.S., starting to maybe focus more so on the northwest near the end of the forecast period. I think we saw that at the end of the ECMWF forecast and the GFS. Like, if we really run this all the way out, you can see some of that focus moving back toward the north, but by and large, still the same configuration of warmth in the central and eastern part of the country, cooler toward the west, perhaps over the far western Canadian prairie, and no breakdown in that Pacific block in the long range. This takes us all the way out to 2026 at this point. As a result of that, the Climate Prediction Center going warm over the middle part of the country through that last week of December. Where are they calling for wetter? Well, in the western U.S., drier for the central and southeastern part of the country, the same kind of corridor where we've been worried about southeastern drought this year. If we go looking deep into the Hobmuller diagrams, as we've done over the last 2 weeks, both Eric and I'm actually using a new model here. This one is brand new, just released yesterday. It is the GFS AI version, so it's an ensemble of the GFS using AI, much like the ensemble AI FS from the ECMWF that we've been showing. Boy, that was a lot of letters in a short sentence there. And you might notice, well, it doesn't have a history because it was just released yesterday, so we can't look back in time, but we can look out in the forecast, which is what my main focus was. And the focus clearly is this dominant ridge across the North Pacific. That's that blocked up pattern. And that ridge often produces a trough just downstream of it across the western U.S. And we see that trough set up nicely here all the way out to January 2nd. We don't see a change in this pairing through the entire forecast period. I don't see a change at all. The only hint of a change I see is that these longer wave troughs, I mentioned this about a week or two ago, tend to retrograde east to west with time and can slowly over like 3 to 4 weeks change the pattern just by that slow nature. And you could argue you're starting to see some of that, maybe at the longer, you see that slight tilt down here after like December 26th, that this ridge might be breaking down toward the west, allowing the trough to build back west with it. That would allow a ridge at some point in January, when it's hard to say, to build back up into over the western U.S. and bring us into a pattern maybe more familiar with what we saw in the middle or early part of December. And even see maybe that ridge trying to push a little bit to the east at the end of the forecast period. That is, not even clear from this forecast here. I'm kind of just extrapolating it out a little bit further, which isn't always the best forecast technique, but it's really the only thing we have to go off. If I try to go off the MJO, much like Eric did yesterday, there's really not much here on our phase diagram. It's in null space, might be traveling weekly back into phase 8, and that's not very informative at this point. If we look at the long-range pattern from the ECMWF weeklies, you can see a hint of that pattern that I described, that scenario. So I'm going to take this out to New Year's Eve. And I'll point out the features I'm watching. There's that Pacific block, just remarkably unchanged from how we started this forecast video out. And this is right 15 days out into the forecast. And there's that Pacific block. This is right now. And there's out, 14 days. There's that Pacific block. There's that trough downstream of it, keeping the west wet, keeping the middle part of the country warm as we go into the new year. And I'm going to play this forecast forward, and I want you to watch the trough here. And we're actually going to look at the 540 decameter line, just because they have that highlighted in blue. That's the only reason I'm pointing that out, because it's kind of easy to see that blue line there. And if I play it forward to like the middle of January, well, ignore the kind of blue and red coloring here. That jet stream starts to push back further toward the north, and we start to get some of that northwest flow action back into the continental U.S. And that ridge and that block that was kind of centered here has started to move west and break down a bit, sort of like I talked about. So at least in the weeklies, we see this pattern that I mentioned start to show up. That would get us back into a more familiar kind of like weak La Nina pattern that we saw in December of 2025, near the end of, or at least the middle to end of January 2026. We saw that in some of the analogs as well that we've talked about. So I'm going to be watching this in the weeklies to see if they hang on to this pattern, kind of day to day. We'll see next week if they're still advertising it, but we can see them still even out into like the end of January, starting to flip us back into a more familiar pattern, less of that western U.S. troughing. Wouldn't be the best news for California, but if you're rooting for like that lake effect snow machine or looking for a pattern change from the middle part of the country, it seems to be there, at least in the distant long range. Despite that, even if we look at the 30-day forecast from the ECMWF, still accounting for a lot of the precipitation we're going to see in early January as this pattern sticks around for a while, bringing a lot of that moisture into the western U.S. Still kind of concerned about this corridor here for drought, but good that they're getting rainfall in here today. And let's see, one other thing I did want to mention here today is if we look at a different Hofmuller diagram, now focused on those trade winds. In the Pacific here, you can see Indonesia, South America here, and I'm really watching in the forecast this way, down below the black line, which is the present day, how those trade winds are going to be changing in this area here, which will be changing our La Nina pattern. And for much of December, which is this area here, we saw a weakness in those trade winds in the Central Pacific. Stronger in November, that's when La Nina was strengthening, and then weaker in December, and so La Nina started to fade a bit. But if you look in the forecast, at least in like the Central and Eastern Pacific out through the end of December, we start to see some weak trade wind bursts show up. And I think this is why it was kind of calling for that weak return of phase 8, because that would kind of be right in here. And that would help to bring some convergence into here, kind of that weak phase 8. We saw that a little bit in the phase diagram where it tried to sneak back out at the end of December into phase 8 there. And this will help to keep La Nina around through the new year, just for a bit, for the next kind of like 2 weeks here. So don't see a huge letting go of La Nina right now at the end of December, but that would be unexpected. Typically, remains through the holidays. That's actually how it got the name El Nino originally. And we see that if we look at the INSO index, hovering around this weak La Nina territory, actually got stronger in November, started to weaken in early December, but started to come back down into this, remaining a weak La Nina at this point, -1 degree Celsius. So not seeing a big kind of giving away of that La Nina here as we end the year. We'll have to kind of wait for that to see where we go in January. Some of the models calling for a rather quick degradation and warm up into INSO neutral and then potentially El Nino territory. Last thing I'll talk about here today, I already kind of showed this a little bit, but the new model is out from NOAA, incorporating an AI-driven backend. It's built on the same GraphCast Google system that the AIFS is from the ECMWF, just with the GFS initial conditions. We tend to think that the ECMWF outperforms the GFS because of those better analyzed initial conditions. But the good news is that the AI model and this new hybrid one that I'm kind of curious about, combining the ensemble, the physical ensemble with the AI one, seems to be at least doing better than the physical older GFS. So we're going to start showing this. We'll have this incorporated on the site at some point here. Shouldn't be too difficult to add, and hoping to get that out for you so we can add another model to the mix when we're trying to figure out where the darn pattern's going, because we have enough problems as it is with the current suite of models. So it'd be good to have a new one out. And I already showed you some of it and looking into that January pattern. I'll leave it there today. Thanks for watching. Travel safe this weekend if I don't talk to you, and we'll be back with you all next week. Eric will talk with you all tomorrow.